Today for Devotions with Daniella, we are reading Generation Hope, How Inclusive Economics Can Help Us All Thrive by Arunjay Katakam. It's a book that I'm reading for my own practice on deconstructing bad stuff that I've been taught. So if you're interested in following along, you can get copies attached here. This is Chapter 2, Outdated and Outmoded. As older generations in political and high-level corporate positions continue to fight progress and deny reality, millennials and Gen Z are shouldering the burden of an uncertain future. And it's no wonder we often feel jaded about that responsibility and outlook. As millennials, we should be the adults in the room making the change, but with far less power than we expected to have by this stage of our lives. How can we be Generation Hope? We are literally Prince Charles, just waiting. Born between the 1980s and the mid-1990s, millennials are the children of baby boomers and older Gen Xers. Baby boomers were obviously named by the dramatic increase in the number of children born during the post-World War II baby boom. In 1964, the novel Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture, which named the next generation, hit the bookstands. Its aim was clear from the first line: to get young people talking about their hates and hopes and fears. The book was an immediate bestseller thanks to its frank, powerful quotes, and Generation X ended up sticking as a moniker, with the X referring to an unknown variable or a desire not to be defined. The natural progression would be to call the generation that followed Generation Y. But decades define us, and during most of that time period, the world was preoccupied with the turn of the century. Millennial, as a term, reflected that focus. Like Gen X, millennial referred to an attitude, a lens through which people viewed the near future. As a result, leading up to the year 2000, we were all millennials, bracing for a new century, living at a time of uncertainty. A lesser-known name for millennials is Echo Boomer. It's not surprising that this name hasn't stuck, given how much this generation has been at odds with our parents' generation. While there is usually animosity and judgment between baby boomers and millennials, there are similarities worth acknowledging. Like baby boomers, millennials are a significant and disruptive demographic. We millennials are now the world's largest generation, and we want to be heard and respected as much as our predecessors. Now that we are approaching our 30s and 40s, we are finding that voice. An overlooked aspect of this similarity is that both generations see themselves as rebels. As Greg Zock, managing director and partner at executive search firm K. Bassman, says, a lot of people complain that millennials are rebellious, bohemian, rule breakers. But if you talk to boomers who went through the 1960s, well, guess what? They were called those same things. What's more, boomers and millennials both have a sensitivity to social injustice and causes. Zock continues, they approach it differently, which is a technology thing. Millennials can reach much more people on social media than we ever could before, but they're not afraid to march. Boomers marched in Mississippi for civil rights. Millennials rallied for Occupy Wall Street movement. It's the values that are similar. With that said, millennials do things very differently from their parents and grandparents, and that goes for more than emergent technology use. In 1968, if you bumped into a 30-year-old, there was a 56% chance that they were married, had children, had a full-time job, and owned a mortgage. Today, however, a 30-year-old is less than 23% likely to have those trademarks of settling down, and that percentage is dropping each year. Meanwhile, 69% of millennials say that they crave adventure, something I totally relate to, having lived on a plane and friends' couches for much of my late 20s and early 30s, buying airplane tickets rather than paying rent. Equally, a friend who settled down early, married at 22, something considered absolutely normal for the previous generation, says she considers it a child marriage and feels she was robbed of her youth. Take the example of Sophia and Andrew, who met in 2013 in Washington, D.C., and struggled to find their way through the demands of raising a family in this era. As recent graduates of U.S. elite universities, each were pursuing prestigious careers. Andrew teaching physics, Sophia working as a science writer for a leading magazine. Their decision to marry shifted their ambitions rather than amplifying them. It forced a familiar reckoning. How would the needs of the household be met, both immediately and when children came? What forms of paid work would be compatible with the division of responsibilities? As devout Catholics, Sophia and Andrew were also acutely aware of the spiritual nature of these questions. Is our paid work a means of self-actualization, or purely a way to put bread on the table? Both or neither? When they met in their late 20s, DC made sense for them both. It is one of the key U.S. cities that draws ambitious young people from all over the world. But even after they combined incomes once married, they needed every cent of what they made to stay afloat. That feeling of the tail wagging the dog became even more pronounced when their first child was born. It was time to make a decision. As of 2023, Sophia and Andrew live in rural Pennsylvania, now with 5 children. Andrew teaches physics and coaches the robotic team at a nearby high school, while Sophia occasionally writes and edits for her old magazine. Teaching is a union job with a modest but steady income and excellent benefits, including health insurance for the whole family, a retirement pension, and crucially, long breaks in the summer so the children can spend meaningful time in Wisconsin every year with their mother's side of the family. Even with the pay cuts they sustained, the 7 of them live comfortably on Andrew's salary. They drive reliable used cars and seldom eat out. Sophia buys organic flour in bulk to bake the family bread, and she and the older children tend the raised garden beds that produce many of the herbs and vegetables the family consumes. Andrew's parents live nearby, as do his sister, her husband, and their 5 children, so there's usually family around when extra hands are needed. As Sophia puts it, they have everything they need and a lot of what they want. And that peace that only comes from knowing the difference between the two. Striking that balance is a feat that only a minority of our generation has accomplished. In fact, most millennials in developed countries are worse off when compared to their baby boomer parents. For instance, when baby boomers were at the median age of 35 in 1990, they owned 21% of the national wealth. At the writing of this book, the millennial cohort won't turn 35 for another 2 years. But as of now, they own just 32% of national wealth. 3.2% of national wealth. With less means and higher expenses than previous generations, millennials can't buy the same stuff, houses, cars, etc., even if they want to. Millennials are the first generation to not have a better life than their parents, in spite of how hard they tried. This is why things like the bank of mom and dad and the significance of inheritances has increased, at least for the lucky few who have inheritances coming their way. Another differentiator for this generation, as predicted by William Strauss and Neil Howe in their book Millennials Rising, The Next Great Generation, is that millennials are civic-minded, having a strong sense of community both locally and globally. In fact, almost 50% of millennials say they'd be more willing to make a purchase from a company if their purchase supports a cause, and 37% say they are willing to pay a bit more for that benefit as well. The generation that raised the baby boomers had come through incredibly difficult times, when money and resources were limited and paying as little as possible was a high priority. For 2 generations, boomers and Gen X, economic abundance grew while mindsets of scarcity remained. Millennials and their younger counterparts see things differently. Perhaps the knowledge that we're burning our planet has given us some perspective. A recent special report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, a group of scientists whose findings are endorsed by the world's governments, described this moment as code red for humanity. The main focus of the report was to identify the increase in global temperature and its cause. Key findings were twofold: that global surface temperature was 1.09 degrees Celsius higher in the decade between 2011 and 2020 than between 1850 and 1900, and that human influence is very likely, 90%, the main driver of the global retreat of glaciers and the decrease in Arctic sea ice since the 1990s. It's become clear that due to the warming we've experienced to date, we can expect a significant jump in extreme weather over the next 20 or 30 years, and things are unfortunately likely to get worse than they are now. The dangers of warming our planet are no longer something distant, impacting people in faraway places. According to the report's many authors, Dr. Friedrich Otto from the University, one of the reports, of Oxford, climate change is not a problem of the future. It's here and now and affecting every region in the world. At the time of this writing, approximately 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases are added to the atmosphere every year. Although this amount may fluctuate from year to year, The